Welcome to From Potential to Powerhouse, Success Secrets from Female Leaders, where female trailblazers share their journeys and the aha moments that made all the difference. With your host, serial entrepreneur and trailblazer herself, Tracy Holland.
Hey, welcome to From Potential to Powerhouse podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Holland.
I mean, honestly, you're really one of the most amazing women I know. I mean, I've always known that on a personal level, but like reading about your professional background and what you've done. So you have had one of the most powerful and successful careers in the financial world, in the boys club of the financial world. You've been at the forefront of running some of the world's most powerful financial institutions, including CEO of Merrill Lynch, Smith-Barney, U.S. Trust, Citi Private Bank, Sanford C. Bernstein. You're also CFO, Chief Financial Officer for CitiGroup. This blew me away. You've led teams of more than 30,000 financial advisors and bankers. No joke. I mean,
yep.
running people, running organizations, reported directly to the CEO of multi-billion-dollar organizations. You've sat on a number of corporate boards. I can't wait. At some point, I'd love to dig into that with you on a different day. But you're chair of Ellevate Network, the global professional women's network, and you most recently pivoted your career to becoming a full-fledged entrepreneur and launched Elevest, a digital financial platform for women funded by VC money, which I think is also its own podcast.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Yes, that is a book, an encyclopedia.
Right? So I think what's so amazing about you in both of these scenarios, I think what's incredible is one, your career path and your career trajectory, but two, I know you've invariably been the only woman in the room in most of these situations. And two, the thing that comes up for me when I look at your career past is that you're really one of the only people to stand up and question the status quo. So you're the lone voice in the room who's like, hello, something smells wrong here. And that's not always popular. So this isn't just me saying you're one of the most powerful women in the world. I have to say that Forbes has said that you're the seventh most powerful woman in the world. And I think one of my favorite parts of reading about you, Sallie, was just reading your own book, Own It.
Thank you.
Which I think every woman who wants to be a leader or a CEO or an entrepreneur should read. So we have a lot to cover. And we'll just take, as much time as you have. And then when we have to head out, we'll head out. But I think we have a lot to cover. So with all of that, I'm so curious. So were you bossy as a kid when you were?
Of course. But more importantly, I was insecure as a kid. And so that insecurity sort of runs through my life, as it does for people who, some number of people who've found success. I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina. We were not of the debutante class. We weren't the folks who had been there for generations who went to the cotillions. I wasn't invited to the cotillions. And so that being on the outside has stayed with me. And then I guess and then I grew up in a family where there were 4 kids, age difference oldest to youngest, 3 years and 11 months, no twins. Try to do that math, which works, but you're jammed in there. And my parents were in their 20s, young 20s when they had us. And so what I learned is the way I could get attention was to excel. So okay, I'm on the outside, and how do you get attention? You work hard and you get good grades. And I think that is what the underpinning is. And then I love to joke, if you've read, if you, depending on how deep you went down the rabbit hole of reading about my background, I went to an all-girls school, and I love to say there's nothing they could do to me on Wall Street that wasn't worse than seventh grade. So you sort of learn, you weren't allowed to not go to school. And so you learn that you just have to get up and get dressed and go back in there to be mocked and ridiculed and chosen last for, the team.
Isn't that true? I had I had a similar experience in grade school because I had a really challenging relationship with my mom. So when I went to school, I really was looking for a family, kind of a support system.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was really tough. I agree. Kind of navigating your way through figuring out who you are as a teenager and then going home, and at least for me, having a challenging family situation, really forced me into thinking about how I was going to support myself, because for me, it was like, how do I get out of this?
Same.
And support myself as fast as possible.
Well, for me, my parents didn't have any money. And so the only thing they fought about was money. I mean, they're so in love. They're still in love today. They're in, she's 80, he's 79. They make out in the kitchen. It's like, enough.
You're so
Enough. But they fought hard about money. And so money was the scarcity. And so people, why'd you go to Wall Street? It's easy. I wanted to earn money. Because I didn't want to be stuck in a relationship where, the power dynamics are such if you're not making money. So for me, it was definitely, when I grew up, I wanted to be rich.
Right. That was what I wanted as well. And so I thought, what's the fastest way to support myself to get the heck out of here? So when you went to college, I actually read a story about your dad when you going back to just kind of seventh grade, when you got your Coke bottle glasses.
I know.
And you said, I don't feel very pretty. And he said, are you kidding me? You're gorgeous. And I'm editing this, so tell me. But he said, you can be beautiful and pretty and also smart. And you can be both.
So the exact story is when I came home, I was crying. I have these Coke bottle glasses. I want to be pretty. He said, you are pretty, Sallie. And look at Gloria Steinem. She wears glasses. She's gorgeous, and she's changing the world. And my dad, who I just adore, I was just affirmed by my father, and he pointed me to a role model, Gloria Steinem, who I don't think a lot of dads in 1970s Charleston, South Carolina were saying, look over here. And so I had very progressive parents. But, and look, I think I was really fortunate because I've read research that says that the foundational relationship of many women who are successful professionally is their father. That if he affirms her, then if other men don't, whatever, because, I have this bedrock strength because the most important man in my life to date, affirms me.
Right.
Whereas if you don't have that, then when the guys are, you're no good, you're like, yeah, maybe that's true. I'm like, no, my dad says I'm great. So whatever, screw off everybody.
Right. I had the exact same situation. My dad, I absolutely felt, even though I know he really wanted a boy, because my name was Michael for 3 days before they could figure out what to do.
Whoop, whoop, boop, boop, boop.
So my middle name ended up Michelle because they thought, and I had no first name for 3 days. But I think he got over it. And I do think I grew up a bit as a boy, or more boy-like, because I knew how important that was for to fit in with my dad. I felt so affirmed by him. And so I was a little bit more like the tomboy, like it sounds like you were, as you were.
I don't know that I was a tomboy per se, because I loved to dress.
Yeah.
I was a cheerleader, Tracy, but again,
Wow.
Charleston, South Carolina in the 80s, it was, I think about it a lot now, or some now, it was volleyball or cheerleading. And I was like, I don't know, cheerleading, I feel like you get more dates. So, the patriarchy was sort of imposing on me that volleyball was a little unfeminine.
Right.
But for me, I was the second. I have an older brother, myself, younger brother, younger sister. And I felt some of the weight of the family on my shoulders because, and I have written about this no place. My older brother is an opioid addict. And so the sort of who's got the family name, who's bringing, for honor to the family. So I was married young and I changed my name to my husband's name right out of school. But when we got divorced, because he had an affair with a friend of mine, I flipped it back to Krawcheck. And when I got married a second time, I didn't change it because part of it is, I'm going to try to hold, sort of fly the banner for the family.
Sure.
And so I wasn't a tomboy per se, but I felt the weight of being the eldest child, even though I wasn't the eldest child.
Are your kids Krawchecks?
Nope. They've got their father's last name, which I actually think is a good thing.
Yeah.
Because New York is a smaller town than you think.
Yeah.
And so they go to school with a bunch of folks who's, because as you noted, I'm a little sparky. And so I'm like, you know what? If I've been in those rooms on Wall Street where I've been like, this is wrong, do we really want to do this? And I got fired. I don't know that my kids need to advertise they're my daughter on the first play date.
Right. No, that's smart. I've grappled with that because I kept my last name as well, and my kids are hyphenated. But they're embarrassed about doing that because they don't want to explain why they have a hyphenated last name.
I never even considered it. I didn't even come up. But there, and to be truthful, there were also times right when my career took off, when I went to CitiGroup and was running Smith-Barney, and I was I was on the front page of the newspapers, and I started to get threats against my family. And so it was also good that they had different last names. Yeah, that was weird. Yeah, being at Citi was weird. Being in those senior roles, it was very strange for a lot of reasons. We used to say everybody was interested in everything we did all the time, and in the financial press. And so people would send you stuff. I remember one of the senior execs there, a woman kept sending him Pop-Tarts. And it wasn't actually even a box of Pop-Tarts, Tracy. It was like one foil container. And you're like, whoa, okay. I think they come 3 in a pack. I haven't had one in a while. And I had someone write to me that they were being held captive in a dungeon by aliens. And so there were weird, sort of some weird times there. So
talk to me about Citi. So you had, what year was that?
2002, I was brought in. So I was brought in there. I had been a research analyst at Sanford Bernstein. I covered Wall Street, which is very meta, which sort of really helped my career because then I got to know all the CEOs of the Wall Street firms because I covered them. And, my research was, if I could, excellent. We're not allowed to say that it's women, so I had to pause and act all, humble. But, and so I had taken on Sandy Weil when the company, Travelers at the time, before they merged with Citibank and became CitiGroup, had bought Salomon Brothers, and everybody was positive about it, and I was negative. And the CEO called me and yelled at me. I'm like, I'm right. And I was right. He later admitted that there were a couple things that happened. He's like, yeah, you saw that better than we did. So he respected me. And so when the the sell side equity research analyst scandal of 2001 happened, where research analysts were essentially lying to their client, hey, you should buy this stock. And they were getting paid by the company whose stock they were promoting, is sort of a shorthand for a more complex situation. I had taken us out of that conflicted business at Sanford Bernstein. So Sandy Weil, the CEO, called me and said, look, you're the one who saw this. You're the most client friendly. Come and run Smith-Barney. And so I have to say I was running 380 people on a Wednesday and 20 something thousand on a Thursday. And everything that went with it. I mean, the plane and the car and driver and the 2 assistants and the big office. I had an office with a shower next to it and my own bathroom at work. I'm like, this is amazing. It was wild. And actually, I loved my time there. I loved the people.
How old were you? How old were you when that happened?
37.
And had you had your children yet?
Yeah. So one of the smartest mistakes I ever made, Tracy, was I had my son when I was 29 and my daughter when I was 31. And I'm just going to say it because they know I love them. They were total accidents.
Wow.
Like total, like when I did the pregnancy test for my son, I think it was like the pregnancy test sang and danced because it was like, you are so pregnant.
Right.
And I'm like, whoops, I could have, I wouldn't have been one of those people who didn't know because I got so big, but it took a while. And so, it was interesting because by the time my career took off, I already had my kids. We already had a routine. My husband already worked it out. So it wasn't, I spent a ton of time with him and stuff, but I didn't interrupt. There wasn't an interruption.
Right.
Once my career started to take off. And I do think that was a little bit of a secret to the success, which is I just flew for a while without, taking a break and I just flew.
Mm-hmm. So your kids were how old by the time you got the first really big high profile job? They were what?
6 and 8.
6 and 7.
They were 6 and 8. So
6 and 8.
they 6 and 7. So, and we had an early reckoning. I remember because all of a sudden I was traveling all over the country and all over the world. And I do remember my son came in one night about 2 months in and said, Mommy, I miss you. I want you to be home more. And I said, okay, I hear you. My husband was standing there. I remember my husband was taking off his tie. I was sort of getting in the sweatpants. And Jonathan left the room and I closed the door. And Gary, who's a wonderful husband, turned to me and said, what are you going to do about that? And I was like, no, what are we going to do about that? Because while he may have said, I want mommy, I think we need to interpret this as I want a parent.
Yeah.
And, let's not have a value judgment as to which is the better parent.
Right.
No, it didn't hurt. Honestly, Tracy, I was making a lot more money than he was. Let's be honest. But he also was open-minded, whereas my first husband was not. And was like, yep, you know what? Excellent point, right? And so from then on, we had a rule of the family, which is, we're not going to every last thing at school because there were so many of them, but for every major to medium thing at school, a parent, at least one parent would be there. We would not promise which parent, but there would be a parent at every basketball game. Not the one that's a 3-hour drive away, but the home games, there is at least one parent there.
That's so incredible. And in hindsight, the kids, now that they're older and really understand what a big job you had or have had and still have, what's that interaction like? I mean, are they proud of you?
Yeah.
I know you're very
never
close.
Ask. I know, we're very close. Here's what I would say. The more important thing is they are both hardworking and successful. So they're both out of college now. My daughter is 23 and my son is 25. She works at Edelman as a, sort of essentially a research analyst. So I'm so proud because, apple tree, not fall far.
Sure. And
my son's a writer for John Oliver's Last Week Tonight. So I've got 2 productive, kids who work hard. And that's really what I wanted. So I never am like, were you proud of me? The important thing was, do they have a role model of someone who was working hard joyfully at something they care about?
Sure. And is your son, I wonder how he would even imagine I'm assuming he's interested in women, or is he not?
Oh, he's a feminist.
Is
He's more of a feminist than I am.
So is he going to
I mean,
marry? Is he going to marry a superstar powerhouse? Do you think, or is he?
Of course, and as is he. But I think both of them are just so aware of the world, and some of this has been driven by, having a president like President Trump, where if you are a young person looking around, you understand that maybe our generation didn't do as good a job on protecting the environment,
Right.
on civil rights,
Right.
on gender rights, as we should have. And they're both incredibly engaged politically and socially, which is good.
It's pretty amazing. I think I do always question, because I too have been challenged by my kids at different times about how much time I'm spending. I too married someone who could stay home, and I made that conscious decision thinking, oh gosh, this is not necessarily the love of my life, but the fact that he wants to stay home and raise kids, maybe that's what I should be focused on. And those are the values that are ultimately going to make these kids great. So figuring out how to deal with my time and my availability. And one of the things I realized at some point was it's actually not quantity of time that we spend with our kids, it's the quality of time. So I immediately started to delegate and outsource everything that I don't do necessarily very well, right? So I don't make a meal, I don't do laundry, I don't try to organize when the water is going to be delivered, and if the gardener's getting his work done. I just kind of figure out how to keep everyone rolling so that I can have quality time with them and sit down and do the things that are most meaningful.
I agree with all that. My one exception, I guess, I don't understand my son was telling me what the love languages are, and I don't understand them, but my love language is cooking. And so I don't cook every night, but on the weekends I cook for the kids, and it's what my mother did. My mother, didn't express love verbally, but she would make us cookies.
Right.
And so I think I've internalized, okay, here are the cookies. Here's and I never did the cookies for school. I was perfectly happy sending, bought baked goods, but I do like, putting food on the table in front of them. Yeah. For me.
That's
but the other stuff, like I actually, what cracked me up, the other little secret I learned, but this is very partner specific, is that I did not shop for the Christmas gifts. And that if I waited long enough, my husband would freak out and do it himself. And so I would wait. And then like on December 23rd, they were all there. And he just like freaked out. I'm like, I was going to do it on the 24th.
Right. I love that. I actually outsourced about 5 years ago. I won some kind of fundraising package, and there was this woman who wraps gifts, and she really does a magnificent job. I mean, she hand cuts the cards. She puts all these decorations.
Oh my gosh.
She's literally an elf angel. And so from that minute forward, I even outsourced the gift wrapping, because my kids literally think Santa is the most creative.
Oh my gosh. No, my children, I mean, they obviously know there's not a Santa now, but we wrap them in bags. We like a brown paper bag. We put a gift in it. We staple it. We're done.
You needed one of my elf wrappers. You needed a magic elf angel. She is so good.
That's funny.
So one of the things I love so much about you, obviously your brains, your grit, I'm sure you've heard this before, like you're a total package, but also you're just open vulnerability. You said when we first met, you said, I think I'm the only person who's been fired on the front page of the Wall Street Journal twice.
The only amendment I'll make to that is woman. I don't think I'm the only person, because guys are allowed to get fired multiple times.
Oh yeah.
But I'm certainly the only woman.
Right.
I know. I remember I met Carly Fiorina at some point. She was still talking about her getting fired. I'm like, Carly, like, back down, lady, twice. Don't like I got fired on me, like, twice.
No, but you know what's interesting is hearing your story about Falcon, and I think the listeners would really benefit from hearing that from you if they're not familiar. But when we as leaders, and regardless of gender, I think when we as leaders in business are standing up and are really the only voice in the room that's saying something different from the rest of the room, right? I don't know about you, but I go through a series of, like, should I say this? This isn't making sense. I know this isn't making sense, but I'm not sure I fully understand the issue at this stage, but I'm going to raise my hand. And I have had a few experiences in, certainly nothing as public as your situation was with Falcon, but that conversation, that internal dialogue that says, I need to say something. Do I go? I mean, certainly on a personal level, it would have been much easier for you to just go with the flow and not say anything.
Sure. And I'd be a lot wealthier.
A lot wealthier.
Because a lot wealthier. Yeah. Well, look, so here's the story. During the subprime crisis of 07, early 08, sitting in my office one day, in comes members of the team with the sort of classic Houston, we've got a problem. We had sold several $1 billion of an investment called Falcon or Matt, don't worry about the name. But the thinking was they were diversified investment groups of different types of bonds that should, because of the diversification, in a bad market, lose very little money. Like terrible market, you lose 8 cents on the dollar, and we'd sold it that way. It was also leveraged, which meant there was a lot of debt supporting it. And when the market went berserk, it didn't lose 8 cents on the dollar, it lost like almost 100 cents on the dollar. This had been sold to our best clients. I went through and, look, I was like, who's the evildoer here? Who lied? Nobody lied. It was just a mistake. It was a dumb mistake in hindsight, but hindsight's 20/20. And so I had been working at Citi for, call it 7 years at the time. I had a new boss. The new boss was a fellow by the name of Vikram Pandit. He'd been brought in because of the crisis. And I'm like, this is sort of an easy call. We made a mistake. Let's go partially reimburse the clients and call it a day. And if we don't, well, first of all, then we're terrible people because we know we made a mistake and we lost our money. And we're Citi. I mean, it's not like we're a mom and pop corner drugstore. We're CitiGroup. And if we don't, they'll sue us, they'll hate us, we'll ruin the business. There are a few examples in the investing industry where people have, you just ruin your business if you lose the trust of the client. So I went to him, he said no. And I'm like, Tracy, I kept going back. I was like, he must not have understood me. He must have heard me. Let me do another analysis. And it got to the point where he wouldn't even return my phone calls. I would lurk outside of his office, and he sent his henchman, a number 2 guy who, by the way, for whatever it's worth, remember when there was the, story about Robert Kraft and all those men in Florida visiting the brothel in the strip mall? Yeah, well, this guy's name was on the list. So, in hindsight, I never stood a chance, right? A misogynist who dehumanizes women. Well, how do you do that, for Christ's sake? But fine. Not fine. But he was dispatched to tell me to sit down and shut up. And it eventually got to the point where it was clear they weren't going to do it. And so we could take it to the board, some of who, by the way, had invested in this product, or I could sit down and shut up. And so we took it to the board, and I would say, newsflash, you take your boss onto the board, you lose your job. So my best case scenario was you go to the board, they side with me, and I lose my job. Worst case is you go to the board, they don't side with me, I lose my job. And at the same time, people who were leaving quietly, they were giving them a zillion dollars to leave. I won. It was time. They exited me and gave me nothing. Except Tracy, except about 5 years ago, for whatever reason, I ran into 3 of the city board members, like within 2 months of each other. One was on a plane, one was in a wine bar, the other was at a dinner. All 3 apologized to me and said, you were brave, you did the right thing, and we shouldn't have let him fire you. And I sort of felt like saying, can I get my money, please? Could I have some money, please?
Right.
But, the bottom line, when people are like, well, why'd you do it? And the answer, of course, is my children. That, if you think about who is the person your children think you are, who are the person you want to be for your children. If the choice is between money, and doing the right thing, it's doing the right thing.
Right.
So that's sort of that story.
And what was amazing to me about that was that you had your own money invested in that investment. And
I lost it too.
And you said, I don't want personal reimbursement. That's not what I'm asking for. I'm asking for the customers to be reimbursed.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
When you went to the board, the 2 of you, was it just the 2 of you and then the board, and you basically had to present? Is that how that worked? Pretty
much. Yeah. There were other people in the room. The general counsel was in the room, blah, blah, blah. But it was a moment. It was a moment. And the shame of it was I loved the job. I did. I loved it. I loved the people. I loved the fact that Smith-Barney, you're trying to help families invest. I loved it. And that was the bigger deal. I'd always sort of told myself, Tracy, well, I am not my job. Right. But I was, that's who I was. And then I was sort of like, how do I even introduce myself anymore? Right. What do I say? What's my elevator pitch?
Yep.
And then Merrill Lynch came calling, and all of a sudden the CEO of Bank of America, Ken Lewis, called me. It was probably 10 months later. Bank of America bought Merrill during the financial crisis, and the thing was just imploding. The financial advisors were leaving. The attrition rate was 55%. It was, I think, unprecedented in history. And called and said, I talked to Sandy Weil, who originally brought you into Citi. He says, you can turn it around. I'm like, put me in, coach. And, the lesson there, I got reorged out of there 2 years later. I didn't do my due diligence. I was so excited. Merrill's bigger than Smith-Barney.
Of course. It's
in even worse shape than Smith-Barney was. Put me in, and I'm going to show you. And even on top of that, Bank of America is headquartered in Charlotte. I'm like, oh my gosh, I went to UNC. I'm from the South. Like, this is a sign from on high. And then Ken told me he'd stay there for 2 years because he's like, this is to be a tricky transition. The culture is really strong. And like literally a month later, he announced his retirement. And, I know. And I sort of knew I was in trouble when nobody called to check on me or tell me or like, oh, this is weird. And I offered to leave, but the CEO was like, no, we need you to turn around, stay. And then 2 years later, to like the week, he calls me and says, the turnaround is complete. The attrition rate went from 55% to 5%, which I love to say you can't get any lower because they count financial advisor death in there, and the average age was 60. And so I can't keep a man alive. Right. So you got it as low as it could get. I'm a very talented woman. I got some talents, Tracy. I can't keep a man alive. It's not within my skill set. We were beating plan. We were gaining share. Like we were rocking. And they called and said, we're going to reorg. Thanks for turning it around. We're going to reorg you out. And then again, talk about women and money. In Wall Street, you get a year-end bonus. The first year we had a handshake on the bonus. The first year, and they didn't pay it to me. They paid me a fraction of it. We can't do a a contract because the regulators won't let us, but we have a handshake, and the CEO left and they paid me 70% of whatever it was supposed to be. The second full year, the company had losses, so they paid nobody a bonus. Fair enough. The third year, we were into Labor Day and they paid me 0 as a bonus. And so you're like, in fact, I think it cost me money to work there because I'm such a Girl Scout. When I joined, I bought the stock. I bought stock and the stock went down. And so I'm like, thank you very much. Yeah. Anyway.
Like, so that just chaps me because,
yeah.
Right? I mean,
oh, let me make it worse. There was a woman there who, when I joined, I actually found the notes, like, I'm going to help you. This place has got a quirky culture. I'm going to help transition you in, blah, blah, blah. And I would go to breakfast with her. I'm like, I just feel like the CEO, I'm not feeling it.
Yeah.
The new guy. And she's like, no, I mean, literally, I took notes like, no, I know you think that, but he's just interpersonally sort of, different. And he's really happy with you and it's all good. So she's sitting across the table from me when they reorged me out. And you're like, hey, sister. So she calls me a couple of years ago. Because I've written about this. I never named her. She called me a couple of years ago and said, I want to talk about this. And I'm like, okay, she's going to apologize, because sister's in arms, right? She's going to be like, hey, I had to protect myself. She calls me. I get on the phone with her. And she's like, I just want you to know what happened. And I'm like, all right, what am I going to do when she apologizes? And she says to me, well, we were never friends. And I'm like, okay. And that was her reason. She didn't help me because we were not friends. And I'm like, okay, goodbye.
Bizarre.
It was the weirdest. And of course, as a woman, you're taught to fill silences.
Of course.
And so she's like, we weren't friends. I'm like, okay. And then it went on. She's like, because we weren't friends. And I'm like, okay.
And so odd. Sometimes those like little aha moments, it does remind me to be more thoughtful about kind of the layers of bubble of allowing in, maybe.
Yeah.
Right. And being aware, because I do look at situations that I've been in and I look at the one woman in the room and I think, she's my girl. We're in it together.
Well, I think for me too, Tracy, I mean, I can't believe we're having this conversation and we haven't been drinking. I think, there's a mom thing going on there. Like, will you be my mom? You're the generation ahead of me. Mm-hmm. I never had a female mentor, mm-hmm. because from the time I was 25, I was the senior woman in all of these firms. And so when I finally got to some place where someone who was, she's 10, 15, 12, 13 years older than me, sure. Maybe 15, then I'm like, mom, like, here's my mom.
Right. And
so I think that, and then the fact that she said she would be and she didn't was so painful. Sure. More than when the guys turn on you, because you're just like, shouldn't we be sisters in arms? But I do think some part of it's generational, mm-hmm. that our generation, has done an okay job. The generation behind us is doing a great job, but the generation ahead of us, each woman for themselves, there's one woman right. in the room. You got to fight like crazy because you're not competing with the men, you're competing with the other women who are looking for your spot. Right. And so I think, it maybe it was personal. I don't want to speak for her, but it wasn't personal, so to speak.
Well, and maybe it was in your light and your, power and your presence. We don't know. It could have been in something that felt intimidating or that she felt, she's going to show you. Yeah. I don't know. And I don't know if that's, I don't know. I think sometimes.
Well, sometimes people just don't like you, right. I felt that with the CEO, that I just sort of felt like, you don't like me. Like, you felt like I was 6 steps behind, and I could almost, the things I would get. So I get my review there. I remember he said, well, I got 2 things for you. And I'm like, okay, ready, and it was, you work too hard and you're intimidating other people and your profile is too high. Now, by the way, that's a very hurtful, damaging thing to say to a woman, because we've been taught not to seek attention.
Sure.
And I'm like, but dude, the only press interviews I've done are ones the company requested that I do. Like, I'm not freelancing here.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm getting attention is because the business is turning around. So the industry is interested. And, he's essentially like, yeah, this is your fault. Make it better.
Well, and,
I know.
the reality is, in your book, one of the things I love so much about what you talk about is, hey, listen, if you think this book is here to tell you that I'm here to talk about how to empower women, that's actually, you already have the power. You are your own power. Own your power, step into it. And as we know, when people have differences of opinion and they state them, that's a natural, there's a natural tension created, right? So I really at least as I saw, your book's thrust is really the fact that the meltdown that we had, the financial meltdown, is because there's this kind of homogeneous approach to big things that are happening, where everybody's kind of attending the same schools and they're attending the same country club and they're attending the same social functions. And so there's almost this group think that's happening, that there's not a like, hey, let's raise the flag, something smells bad. It's the one.
Well, because if you hire people just like yourself, you might as well not. Why bother?
Right.
You already know what you think.
Right.
You already know that your experience on XYZ trading desk, in 1986, you already know that. But there is this comfort in, I call it the false comfort of agreement. You're with people like yourself. It just feels better than being with, at Elevest right now, we have a very diverse organization. Age diversity, gender diversity, ethnic diversity, racial diversity, diversity of thought, perspective, education, national, you name it. It's uncomfortable. Sometimes I'm like, could I just be right one time? Could somebody, please, just once? I
thought I was the boss.
These kids in their 20s, they keep telling me what to do. And you know what? A lot of times they're right. It's just like, damn it. Come on, guys. Come on, gals, people. Why just one time?
So let's talk about your shift into being an entrepreneur. I'm so excited to talk about this because, you have been at the forefront of these massive public companies in these roles, and talk about, from someone standing from the outside, they're like, oh, business is business. You run a company, you know how to do it. So what's this?
No, it's totally different. It's much harder. And I don't recommend it to anybody unless you just have to. If you have an idea that you're passionate about and you can't get it done in a big company, that's when you do a startup. Right. And for me, it was when I recognized that women don't invest as much as men do. Mm-hmm. Women aren't as engaged in their money as much as men are. Mm-hmm. Money is women's number one source of stress. Mm-hmm. The action, taking action around the driver of her confidence in her future. Mm-hmm. But that every big bank had a women's initiative and every one of them failed. And Tracy, it's because they were all marketing initiatives. Let's have some Chardonnay and talk about investing. And we all blame women, right? Women are risk averse. It's their fault. And you're like, well, the fact that they're not investing might be that they're risk averse. It also might be because they're not buying what you're selling.
Right.
And that in an industry where 99% of investment dollars are managed at companies owned by white men and 98% of mutual fund dollars are managed by men, maybe you built a business for yourselves.
Right.
Like name a woman who wants to trade Bitcoin, okay? But even name a woman who wants to figure out when to buy and sell IBM.
Right.
they took investing, they made it a sport, they put the brand symbol of a bull on it, and they sell it to themselves. And I said, you know what? I'm seeing the scales are falling away from my eyes. That women, we talk about the gender pay gap. For some women, the gender investing gap is as big.
Right.
We talk about the gender pay gap. There's a gender wealth gap where women earn 82 cents to a man's dollar. They have 32 cents to a man's dollar.
Right.
Like, this is bad. And so at first I'm like, well, let me go to a company and do this, but it's very hard to change a culture from the inside. Very hard. Very hard. Particularly, by the way, why did you do it when you ran Merrill, Sallie? Because we were making billions of dollars of profit. For me to say, you know what we're doing, let's change it.
Right.
Right? You know, and if you even try to, well, let's have a little skunk works, rarely do those work. And so I said, you know, I wish there was something I could buy, you know, find a private equity firm and buy something, but this has to be done from scratch. And, you know, you haven't been alive till you've tried to go raise money as a woman in her 50s, you know, where the sexism, the ageism, and then the sort of like, because you were, I mean, understandably, well, you were successful at big companies. Why in the world would you be good at a startup?
Right.
You know, raising money is just, it's hell. It's hell.
But you're doing such important work. And I mean, I took all of my retirement money and put it into Ellevest, because you're not only giving information to women who need it on how to invest, because guess what? Guess how much time I have to think about where I'm investing my money?
None.
How much?
Zero.
Mulch.
You need a place you can trust. And the problem is women don't trust the industry, and they've been given reason. I mean, it's, you know, not a surprise. They've been given reason not to.
Right.
But we're the only one, Tracy, that built a business from the ground up targeted to women, not unlike what Whitney Wolf is doing at Bumble.
Right.
What Jen Hyman is doing at Rent the Runway.
Yep.
What Julie Wainwright is doing at The Real Real.
Yep.
Right. You sort of look at, there's a group of businesses where women are solving a problem for women that men didn't even realize was there.
Right.
Right. You know, what women need their own date, you know, a site where they can make the first move. Who needs that? Like, women do.
Right.
Women do.
Right.
And so I actually think at Elevest, there's sort of four really important trends that we're on top of. One of which is women solving problems for women. The other, which is the economic rise of women, might not happen as fast as we want, but it's happening. Mm-hmm. The other is the digitization of finance, more and more online. Mm-hmm. And the fourth of them is the rise of mission-driven brands.
Right.
You know, our company, there goes the grandfather clock. Our company is all about, our mission is to get more money in the hands of women. Everybody at the company can tell you that. They can tell you at 3:00 in the morning if you woke them up, what's Ellevest mission? They know it. And they, you know, during these tough times during the pandemic, you know, they knew they were going to work because they were, you know, as part of the solution, not part of the problem.
So aside from raising money, being an entrepreneur, what's kind of your aha? It's been what, 4 years now?
We launched 4 years ago. We've been at it for 6 because we really took 2 years it was a problem we had to solve. Nobody had solved the problem of how to engage women with their money. So it was 2 years. So anyway, it's been 6 since we started, 4 since we launched.
And so what would you say, you know, your definition of being an entrepreneur means to you now, knowing what you
Crazy. It means I'm berserk. I mean, out of my mind. Look, it's all hard. You know, the thing they don't tell you, Tracy, is every bit of it is hard. And yeah, you have moments where like, wow, we just beat plan. But at the beginning, you are 1 or 2, maybe 3, but 3 is stretching it, mistakes away from being out of business. Totally. You start off, you hire the wrong head of product, you're done. You hire the wrong chief technology officer, you are DONE, done, right? And later you can make a few more mistakes, but and then you have to raise money. And how do you even find your way?
Right.
Like, how do you even get a meeting?
Right.
And then as a woman, you know, when you get the meeting, you know, so one secret, before I would, if I had the luxury, and you don't always, but before, if I go to meet with a venture capitalist, how do you make decisions? Because I knew that if it was consensus and a group of men all had to agree to invest in Elevest with just the one guy who met with me pitching, it was never getting through. I can't get through, if there are 8 decision makers, 8 men's lifetime socialization, you know, about what women want, right? You can't.
Right.
If it's, hey, we just need one person to believe and fight for you, or 2, I can do that every time.
Sure.
Every time, but I can't do consensus. And then the third difficulty that no one tells you about is when you're growing and you're doing well, you're still miserable because you still have to fire people. Like the person who was great when the tech team was 3 people is not the right person when you're 30.
I know.
Right? And it like happens so fast. Somebody, you're like, boy, that person is so good at their job.
Right.
And then like a week later, you're like, they sort of look miserable and they seem a little tuned out. You're like, oh, we scaled through them last Tuesday.
Right.
And nobody warns you.
Right.
Because you think if you're growing, everything's great. But if you're growing, it's a friggin' clown car. Clown car.
I know. It's tough. That's why when I read that you manage 30,000 people, I mean, my business has been, you know, I think we were probably most productive ever when we were 13 people.
Yeah.
Then we went to, at some point, to 124 people. I would wake up, I would get in the elevator and I would get in the elevator and there'd be people who didn't know my name. They were like, oh, hi. I was like, hey, how are you?
I got to be honest with you, 32,000, 40, it's easier because the processes are typically in place. You're not, you know, scaling crazy. You're, you know, if you have that many people, you may be growing, but you've got the processes, you've got the people. Nobody can sink you.
Right.
You know, when you're smaller, you know, you lose 3 people, you're like, oh my gosh.
It's
right. I mean, we just last week discovered there's one individual. We're like, yeah, that person's not doing that great. And well, should we take action? Well, no, this person's the only person who knows how to do X, Y, and Z.
Oh,
and I'm like, well,
right.
we cannot afford to lose that person.
Right.
You know, whereas you've got that 30, 40,000 people, you lose anybody. You're like, next.
Right. Right.
I mean, you don't be cruel because people are important. But it's a very different. And so, you know, I look at people now who run these huge scale business. I'm like, I mean, it's not easy, but it's not that hard. Startup, that's hard.
It is.
You got to get the great idea. You got to get the right people. You got to raise money, but you can't get the people till you have the money, but you can't get the money till you have the people.
Yep.
Right? You got to have, and then with us at Elevest, what I didn't realize is, well, you got to build a community. Because women aren't gathered together around money any place. So we have to be that place. We have to build a brand because women aren't going to give you their money to manage it. They don't know who you are.
Right.
You got to build a product, but you have to build a product that's for women, which nobody, I mean, and then plus a compliance infrastructure and a tech infrastructure. Like, I'm like, wow, that's hard stuff. I really didn't think about that very much before I got started.
Right. And do you have an integrator partner? So are you operator day to day, or are you visionary out kind of front face?
It's a great question. It changes, you know. So when we started, I was like, I don't want to manage one other person in my whole life. I just want to, you know, I want to be out there. I want to be sharing the message. I want to think strategy. I don't want to be tactics. And then as we scaled, you know, all of a sudden I was finding, okay, I can do this. I've done it, you know, but for my co-founder was more of an early stage person. And so I'm like, all right, now give me product. Okay, now give me, you know, and all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, I went from being Ms. Outside to Ms. Inside.
Right.
You know, and it's hard to do 2 jobs at once. So it's shifted, which is, you know, look, it's my baby. So whatever Tracy, I write the newsletter every week. I mean, whatever it takes.
Right. I love your newsletter, by the way.
Thank
I
you.
can tell you write it. Actually, when I get it, I'm like, this is so Sallie. I love it. I love it. Yes. So I would say last but not least, do you have anything you want to share with everyone around any kind of success or daily habits? Anything? Do you get up in the morning and read the journal? Do you run? Do you do the red sauna?
No. I wake up early. Always I wake up tense and anxious, and then I hit on whatever. I have this strange little gift, which is I'll wake up and know where I made a mistake. Like when I used to build earnings models, I would wake up and be like, oh my gosh, there's a problem with the cash flow statement, which didn't even show up. Then I go and be like, yep, there it is. So there's something a little weird that happens in my brain. Look, my secret, Tracy, which is not much of a secret, is I'm two things at once. I am so pissed off and I am eternally grateful. So I can't believe women are not further ahead in this day and age, which just pisses me off. I can't believe, we elected to the highest office. I understand why, but when you look at, as a country, someone who would talk about grabbing a woman's unprintables, and I'm just so pissed off. And having children, let me go. And then the other side is I just have so much fun. I love what I've done. Even the jobs I've hated, I've loved. Yeah. Even when I was getting fired, I was having a blast. Yeah. And so I think, it's one life. I've got one life. I'm so privileged. I'm so fortunate. I've gotten to do so many things no one else has done. Like I get to know you. I mean, like, this is amazing. It's amazing.
I know. And honestly, the things that you're doing are just, even imagine the ripple effect of what you have done for women that you will never meet, Sallie.
Well, you're sweet.
Never meet, that you have made an impact on career after career after career across the
you're nice.
United States and the world. Really.
You're nice.
Serious shit.
Well, we do recognize it's her number one source of stress. Money's her number one source of stress. If we can help her with that, then we've hit in her gut. Totally. Right? We've hit in her gut. Totally. And as I say, money isn't money. Money is take your hand off my friggin' leg. Mm-hmm. Money is I'm out of this relationship. Money is I quit, stuff it up your what. Mm-hmm. Money is I've got this idea, that I have to execute on. So we've made money this weird, tacky thing for women, but money is everything.
It is.
Right? It's everything. And so what we're doing is bigger than just, well, we got another X $1,000 in your checking account. It's like we got you out of the job where the lech is letting his eyes linger a little too long. It's important. Exactly. I always say, women, we will not have full equality until we have financial equality. That's it in a nutshell.
Period. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to From Potential to Powerhouse, Success Secrets from Female Leaders with your host, Tracy Holland.